In this lesson, we're going to continue discussing preferences. If you'd like to follow along, go under the File menu to Open, and in the sample files, go to Chapter 2 and select 0204-0205, What's Your Preference, and just click Open. Why don't we go back into Preferences? I'm going to hit Command-K on a Mac, Control-K on a PC. And we're going to continue discussing preferences that you may want to change temporarily to solve a problem. Let me give you a good example. I'm going to go to something called the Composition section, which has to do with type. By default, something called Substituted Fonts is checked. If you open a document and don't have a particular typeface, it's going to be highlighted in a particular color. It's like a salmon color. So that's a good thing, because not only will you get a warning when you open a document if you don't have a particular font, it's also going to highlight it for you in the document itself so you know where it is. But let's say I've been working on a document and I sent it to my client and they sent back edits. And there were certain paragraphs that I changed the tracking from the default of 0 to move the letters in that paragraph slightly closer together so that in the last line of certain paragraphs where there's just a single word, I can bring that one lonely word up into the second to the last line. So it's not just sitting there by itself. Well, when I get my edits, I may want to come into Preferences and temporarily check Custom Tracking and Kerning. I'm going to do that and click OK. And anywhere I used Custom Tracking or Kerning, it's going to highlight it. So I could change the tracking back to 0, so I'm not using Custom Tracking when I don't need to. It will look better. And then when I'm done with my editing, I can go back into Preferences. Let me do that. Command-K, Control-K on a PC, and go to Composition and uncheck Custom Tracking and Kerning. We've already talked about units and increments. You'll see that I changed my defaults to inches because I like using inches, and most of the measurements that I get are in inches instead of the default picas. So if you want to change your units and increments, you can do it right here to both the horizontal and vertical rulers. Let me go into the grid section. By default, the document grid, if you turn it on under the View menu, is in back. Let me just click OK. And I'm going to turn on my document grid by going under the View menu to Grids and Guides, Show Document Grid. And you can see that my grid is behind everything, including this green background. Well, let me zoom in with my zoom tool. If you're not in your zoom tool, hit your Z key to go there. And then I'm going to click and drag across the width of this page. So if I was working in this area, or if this background covered the entire page, I wouldn't be able to see my grid in order to line up everything with the grid. So maybe I would go into Preferences and temporarily change this default preference of grid in back. So I'm going to go to Command-K on a Mac, Control-K on a PC, go to Grids, and I would simply uncheck Grids in back. And then when I'm done working on this document or on that page, I could go back in here and change it back to the default. I'm going to go down to Display Performance. One of the things that I usually change is Display Performance for vector graphics. By default, it's using something called Proxy. Let me just click OK and scroll down a little bit on my page. And I just wanted to point out that my logo is extremely pixelated. That's the way vector graphics look by default. This may make it quite difficult for you to position your logos exactly where you want them. It's kind of hard to see what's going on. Well, let me go back into Preferences, Command or Control K, and go to Display Performance. For vector graphics, I'm going to go all the way up to High Resolution and click OK. So when I'm positioning my logos, it's a lot easier because it's really clear. And then when I'm done, I may want to change it back. Let me do that. I'm going to go to Command K on a Mac, Control K on a PC, and go to Display Performance. And I would drag that back down to Proxy. Well, why would I want to do that and make all the positioning of my logos unclear? Well, if I'm using complex vector graphics, it may take a bit of time for my page to redraw. So if you find that it's taking forever for your page to redraw when you scroll on your page, you may want to make your vector graphics back to Proxy, the default. So it will come up almost instantaneously. There is no lag time when you scroll. So most of the time when I'm changing preferences, it's to solve a problem. And then when I'm done solving that problem, I'll in most cases go back to the default. The only time I'll change my preferences is if I work a little bit differently than the typical user. I may want to customize my preferences slightly for the way I work. In the next lesson, we're going to continue discussing workspace and preferences.